Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Undrai, Fizer. Welcome to Profoundly Speaking, where we have these weekly conversations as it relates to our daily evolution into the divine, mastering the emotional and psychological, mastering the psychological and emotional concepts of the divine nature, beginning to feel and process and become and allow in our very own selves the instruction of God within us. We know that we are the nature rhetorically, but a lot of us may not function from the nature psychologically and emotionally. Because when we allow in the blood, which we call the spirit, when we allow in the blood the emotional reality. Let me put it this way. Just like a fence is in the emotion, which causes us to react. Because when we believe that we've been damaged, when we believe that we've been hurt or wronged, it gets into the emotion and we begin to respond. We begin to perceive ourselves from the offense. We begin to feel belittled by how the offense takes us. And we begin to emotionally process it and we react out of it without knowing what it is. Now, if offense has that type of power over us, imagine what truth has over us. How many of you have been positively offended, and I don't mean in a negative way, but positively moved by truth? Just like we're moved emotionally by offense and misunderstanding. Have you received truth in the psyche where it causes you to live out the power of the truth that you received? Am I making sense? And so we begin to process this nature psychologically in the blood. I'm on dialysis, and I explain this a lot. Every week I have labs. They begin to check my phosphorus and calcium and cholesterol and A1C. They begin to check everything I've eaten, because what I've eaten begins to distribute itself and break itself down in the blood. And so they check your cholesterol. They know what you've eaten by the numbers, by the lab. And the atmosphere knows if you've eaten the flesh of the divine by the labs that check your consciousness every day. Every day we're being judged by the judgment seat of the divine labs, which begins to check our blood, which begins to check what we have eaten. Because whatever we have eaten will be seen in the blood and in our reaction and how we take the truth, how we take it. Not just how we take someone telling us the truth, but how we receive from God, how we feed from God. Because when we feed from God, and not just positive affirmation, but when we feed from God, you can look in our blood and begin to see the shift in our blood that we have eaten the flesh of the divine. Raise your hands if you know what I'm talking about. John chapter 6 talks about Jesus saying, eat my flesh and drink my blood. Because if you don't eat my flesh, you won't have life in you. You won't have fulfillment in you. And so many times we try to make up fulfillment. We try to create testimony. We try to create positives. But when you have eaten and divinely and authentically partaken of the divine, you don't have to make up anything, because the fulfillment will speak for you. The fulfillment. And see, the tragedy is we are understanding more secrets than we take in. That's the tragedy and the deceitfulness of learning kingdom without becoming kingdom, of learning the secrets of kingdom without going through the psychological process of allowing truth to get into your cells, which creates the way you make decisions, which creates the way you perceive life and how you react and respond to life, and the decisions that you make in your response to that life. And also in the prioritization of how you see yourself in that life. That's the deceitfulness of walking with God without becoming God. That's the deceitfulness of walking with God and eating out of God's lunch baskets without becoming God. When I'm learning as a human being what I should be as God, it will be inconsiderate of my humanness. because God will find himself not easing me into the revelation of who I am. Because when you look at the scripture in Revelation, it talks about no flesh shall be in that kingdom. And it says that the Lamb is the temple. There was no temple in it, for the Lamb was the temple. And then it began to say, no flesh shall enter in it. And so many times we live as flesh, as common men, trying to learn the secrets of the divine. And the divine has no consideration of our common flesh. The divine has no consideration of what's going to happen to our flesh. You look in the scriptures and it says, God said, no man could see me because you can't see me and live. You can't see me common and remain that way. You can't remain common and see the full glory of who you are and remain that way. And so many times we want to remain who we are because we can control who we are. Raise your hands if you know what I'm talking about. I can't seek to remain who I am and take a peek over into my greatness and remain who I am. You're going to be offended, not just mad, but the spirit realm will not reconform itself to occupy and to be considerate of your limited perspective. So therefore, we must eat the flesh of Christ. We must partake of Christ to become our Christ. Am I making sense? And so it must be a psychological shift, not just a formula we remember. It must be a psychological shift and not just a formula that we remember and try to practice. It must be a psychological shift within us that causes us to see ourselves in the same reality as the divine. And as we begin to see ourselves in the same reality as the divine, we begin to prioritize life from it, and we begin to create from the decisions we make. We begin to create ourselves out of debt. We begin to make decisions out of debt. We don't pray our way out of debt. We pay our way out of debt. We begin to handle different things. Let me read something from you. And I shared this with our Raleigh, our interglobal Raleigh group, who I'm so proud of. Hebrews 2:11. I also shared it in the app as well. Those of you who may not have it, download the Fizer Interglobal app. Go to the App Store or the Google Store and download our educational app, Fizer Interglobal. Now, in the New Living Translation, this scripture in Hebrews 2:11. So now Jesus and the ones he makes holy have the same Father. Now, we read this and Lord, we must have lost our mind. It says, now Jesus and the ones he makes holy have the same Father. And it says, that is why Jesus is not ashamed to call them his brothers and his sisters. We have the same Father. Jesus and those he's making holy have the same Father. Christy Henderson, it says Jesus and us have the same Father, not the same symbolism of Christianity. It says, so now Jesus and those he's making holy have the same Father. So therefore, he doesn't think it's unworthy or less than to call us his brothers and sisters, which means all of us are little Christ. All of us are Christ. He's Jesus the Christ. I'm Undrai the Christ. You're Christy the Christ. Von Edric the Christ. Jason the Christ. Kathy the Christ. Bridget the Christ. Whoever's on the Christ. Yvette the Christ. Edna the Christ. Now, see, the funny part is, all of us as believers can agree on hell. No questions asked. We all can agree on sin. We all can agree on salvation. But we don't all agree that we're God's. And until we all agree and come into the unity of the faith, not the unity of sin, not the unity of Jesus down on the cross, but the unity of the faith of God, that we all come into what God has faith in himself. When we all come into God's faith, because God believes that I'm his son. He believes it. And I don't know how to say anything different than what my Father believes. I'm not going to make my Father a lie to make people comfortable with my language. I'm not going to make God a lie. I'm trying to help my brothers come into the unity of the faith, not the unity of Christianity, not the unity of salvation, not the unity of the church and the local assembly, but the unity of the faith of God. God believes, oh my God, God believes that we are him. God believes that Jesus believes that I'm his brother. Because he, Jesus, and them that are being sanctified have the same Father. And if he's the Father of Jesus, and Jesus is who God is, then I too and you too are who God is. But until we come into this psychological agreement, Lord, until we come into the agreement when this truth is in ourselves, and it causes us to permeate activity from it, we'll be able to handle all things. But until then, if we can't handle people's language, if we can't handle tone, if we can't handle what tense we talk in, we can't handle being God. We can't handle being God if we can't handle being human. If you can't handle communication, you can't handle being divine. If simple communication breaks you down, my God, your divine nature isn't strong enough. If money breaks you down, your nature is not strong enough. Sometimes, and we talked about this in our class today, sometimes trouble comes, not because you did something wrong. Sometimes trouble is the mirror that causes you to see what you really know. Trouble ain't trouble just to be trouble. Trouble comes to be a mirror so you can see yourself, so you can authentically identify with what you have truly become. You don't know what you become when life is laughing with you. But when life is against you, you can look at yourself to know authentically what you've become, because now trouble is a mirror. When trouble came to the disciples on the boat, the rain and the storm, Jesus was asleep, but the storm revealed what they did not yet believe. They told Jesus, they said, you don't care if we die? Jesus is in the boat asleep. The storm revealed that he was over it. The storm revealed, it gave him a mirror. The storm didn't stop because he's the Son of God. The storm still came, but it was a mirror, and he looked in it and saw, I'm good. And the scriptures say he slept soundly. But the storm revealed the fear of the disciples. Now, if the water was calm, you wouldn't have known how they felt. But you see how they felt because of the storm. You understand what I'm saying? Them that Jesus has made holy, Jesus and those he make holy have the same Father. Now we hear it, but how does it affect you emotionally? Because that revelation won't mean anything if you're seeking to be approved and accepted by a mere person. Some of us won't be happy until a mere person accepts us. Some of us won't be happy unless a mere human being accepts us. Some of us are being choked in the revelation because we're waiting for a human being to accept us first, and then we can accept the revelation. Well, something is wrong with your psyche. If you're waiting for something more limiting than who you really are. You understand what I'm saying? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So when we hear these revelations, how do they affect you psychologically? How do they affect you in your self-perception and how you see the world? And then how you make decisions based on your perception, based on how you prioritize the commonwealth of your understanding. How do you perceive you? And I perceive me a certain way. Just like a misunderstanding with another person can make you give up and make you walk in pain and make you walk in doubt because someone said something to your mind. It means your nature ain't strong enough. You understand? Because the truth gotta be strong enough. Well, it's not just gonna be strong enough on its own. Your trust in the truth makes the truth strong. The truth isn't just strong. The truth is as strong as your trust in it. Did that make sense? The truth isn't just strong. The truth is as strong as your trust in it. That makes sense? Because if you don't trust it, your weakness is stronger than the truth. If you don't trust the divine, your offense is stronger than the truth. If you don't trust the reality, your emotional perspective is stronger than it. And that's trouble. When your emotional perspective is stronger than principle, you're unteachable. You're unteachable when your waywardness has more weight than principle. Am I making sense? The truth isn't strong because it's God. It's stronger when you trust it. Because see, when we talked about it today, when you trust the divine, you'll take your hand off the clock and take your hand off of time. You won't try to speed up time. See, we want acceleration because we don't want the patience to reveal what we don't believe. So we want God to hurry up while we're motivated. Don't take your time, God. I don't have the endurance to become. So I need you to hurry up and accelerate the promise before I'm left to deal with my authentic doubt. So before doubt peeks out, hurry up and get it done. Because if you don't get it done, my doubt is going to speak for me. And I need you to hurry up and speak before my real belief peeks out. But I'm going to tell you something. And I'm going to ask you this question. Do you believe how God believes? Not only do you believe what God believes, do you believe how he believes? Because when God fills us with his spirit, he fills us with his endurance, his intelligence, his experience, and his know-how. The reason he establishes the concepts, he fills you with the secrets. And as I said earlier, it's nothing more deceitful and dangerous than to sit in God's school, hearing God's secret while remaining human. Hearing the secrets of the kingdom while remaining human. Because when you remain human, hearing the secrets of the kingdom, you begin to dissect the kingdom to see which ones that you can handle. And you begin to feel, I don't know if I want that experience. You begin to interpret the experience through your finality and your finite consciousness. That's the danger of still being flesh entering into the temple. In Revelation, it says, no flesh shall enter therein. No flesh shall go there. It's really terrible to remain flesh and sneak around in God, because you're not going to interpret it correctly. It's a dangerous thing to get a key and sneak in God's house and look through his papers, and you're still a limited flesh being. When you're an ungod trying to learn about God, it's going to destroy the ungodness of you. Not just sinful acts, but it's going to destroy an identity that God never made. And a lot of us have made ourselves into a being that God isn't responsible for. Living from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is responsible for some of this identity. And we are living from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, trying to understand life. And the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which causes us to compare ourselves, isn't allowing us to understand or understand the mind of God, because we're trying to live in two places at one time. We're trying to coexist as two things at one time, and we're trying to decide what we're going to do. So I'm trying to learn what to do without becoming what I should be. I'm trying to see what my purpose is without becoming God. I'm trying to see what God's will for my life without becoming what God is. I'm trying to see what to do without becoming what God is. I'm trying to see what's the next step. But the next step is never for a human being. You can never remain who you are and find out the next step, because it ain't designed for you. The next step is not designed for you. The next step is never designed for something you're going to die out of. The next step for your unbelief is death. The next step for your doubting self is death. Spirit death, mind death. That's the next step. The next step for you isn't life, but death. Losing that life. Am I making sense to you? There's nothing more dangerous than be sitting on the front row of a divine kingdom school, still living as you were. It's not a matter if you're doing the wrong things, but living from the wrong consciousness, living from good and evil, trying to learn God, taking all the secrets and writing them down without embracing the emotions of God and the feelings that God has being God that caused him to establish his whys. I'm trying to learn his secrets as a human. I'm going to act like a disciple. That's why he lost 58 of his disciples when he said, eat my flesh and drink my blood. And 58 of his disciples said, that's hard. You want us to eat your flesh? This man is trying to give us his flesh to eat. And they left him because they was trying to partake of a divine thing without truly being sons. That's a terrible situation, and many of us are going through that right now. Trying to learn the kingdom being human. Trying to learn the kingdom living from our present mindset. And therefore, we're in this constant conundrum of trying to learn something without dying out of something. I'm trying to learn without dying. I'm trying to learn without actually dying. You think you're going to defeat the death of the false identity? You think you're going to bypass death of consciousness to learn? You can't get it. Some things you can't get. You got to grow them. You have to earn the right to grow the tree of life. There's some things you're not going to get until you grow them. You're not going to get it hearing it. You're not going to get it repeating it, because the atmosphere is voice activated, not echo activated. It's original voice activated. The atmosphere is not going to listen to you repeat another man. The atmosphere has to hear you speak from the divine heart of God. The atmosphere isn't moved by you repeating from someone else. The atmosphere has to hear your original voice. And you can't discover your original voice if you're afraid to die from this illusion you're in. Raise your hands if you know what I'm talking about. If you're afraid to die from this illusion, you're not going to find your original voice. Some of you are trying to find your original voice, living as a copy. You're still a copy. You're still afraid of other people. You're still trying to get the approval of people, and then you're trying to discover your original voice. You can't find your original voice, and you're still controlled by regular human beings. You can't find your original voice. You can't cheat God. You can't cheat God and then blame it on the personality of other people to make it seem like they're keeping you from something. You can't cheat the process. And some of you are overdue. You are still allowing yourself to suffer without dying. You're just allowing yourself to get hurt. You're not dying. You're just letting yourself get hurt by the truth instead of letting the truth separate you from that illusion. Oh, I know what I'm saying. I'm afraid to die. I still want to remain me and look over. I just want to see. Raise your hand if you know what I'm saying. God's belief is that we're his sons. We all agree on sin. We all agree on death. We all agree on the devil, but we don't agree that we're God. We don't agree that we're Christ. We agree that we're Christian, but we agree that we're Christian more than we believe that we're Christ. So we haven't come into the unity of the faith. We haven't come into the unity of God's faith. We may have come into the unity of our personal religion, but we have yet to come into the unity of the faith that God has. So before I go, do you feel we've come into the unity of the knowing that God has? Imagine this. I said this the other day on my live. The Pharisees were taught to rip and rent their robes when they heard blasphemy. And so when Jesus said that he was the Son of God, and they heard it, they rent their robes. Whenever they hear blasphemy, they tear their priestly robes as a spit in the face and as a damnation to the heretic and as a cut off from the people. If the atmosphere asks you, are you sons of God? Are you Christ, sons of the living God? And we all say in unison, yes, we are. There is going to be a renting of the robe from one era to the next. How many of you are ready for that new era? How many, and I'm not talking about new blessings. I'm not talking about new cars. I'm not talking about new money. I'm not talking about new businesses. How many of you are mentally and emotionally ready for the new era of the kingdom? And the only way we could usher in that era is not through prayer, but by decreeing what the atmosphere may deem blasphemous, by fully coming into the faith and knowing that God has. And when we come into it together with an agreement, emotional, psychologically, and spiritually, there is going to be a rent sound throughout the atmosphere, ushering in this brand new era of governance and authority and power. Because it ain't nothing like being a thief in God's house, learning from God without becoming God, learning what tomorrow is without becoming tomorrow, looking at it in order to manipulate the process to compensate for our lack of faith and knowing and trust. So when you learn a secret for something you're not called into, you could manipulate it and fix it and water it down and then eat it, trying to chew out all the nutrients of the becomingness. So you could say, at least I have it. And there's nothing more unfulfilling than eating from God's table without becoming God. There's nothing more unfulfilling than eating food from the table without becoming what you ate. Nothing more unfulfilling than eating and not becoming what you should have become because you feared the becomingness of it. Am I making sense? Yeah. So before I go, begin to receive. Now I'm saying it, and that's also deceitful because we say, I receive, but you won't receive until it permeates into your consciousness and your blood and your ways and your mind and your blood, and it begins to speak out of you. You can always say you can receive and just move on to the next thing. If you receive, it's going to permeate. Just like when I eat, it gets into my blood, and when I have labs at dialysis, they can tell that what I've eaten by how my blood and the cells have been manipulated by the food that I ate. When you eat the divine, it'll show in your blood. Not when you hear it, not when you hear it, not when you hear it, but when you eat it. Not when you listen to it, not when you study it, but when you eat it. Eat my flesh, drink my blood. So therefore, when that lab is taken, we can see what you've been eating, because your life has been manipulated by the meat of the kingdom. I could tell because your life has been manipulated by what you've partaken of. Making sense? Get the Fizer Interglobal app. Get it today. There's podcasts on there. There's videos on there. There's a lot of information on there. So get it and check it out. There's also schedules on our weekly institute, okay? Hey, you've been blessed today. I know you have. Give an offering. Sow an investment in what you've heard. Connect with it. Make a contract with it. I don't need to come up with any tricky games or gimmicks to tell you to give anything. Just go to the app to invest financially, or Cash App at $Coach Fizer, and just sow from a debit card or credit card. You have it. Don't listen to it and agree with me, and don't sow into it. I don't need to give no gimmicks. I'm not going to say turn around 5 times, God going to bless you with something. No, you are already blessed to hear it. You'll be even more blessed to become it. Okay? That's $Coach Fizer. That's Cash App. It invests what you see. Or if you have the Fizer Interglobal app, go to Invest Financially in the app and give through PayPal. Simple. Okay? Much love to you, and remember, God believes that we're his sons. God believes it. God knows it. He don't just believe it. He made it possible. I believe what God believes, and I believe how God believes, and I believe why God believes. I'm not going to deny myself to make people comfortable with the language. I'm not going to make my father a liar because people can't stand the language. Don't you do that. I'm Undrai Fizer. Peace. And share this. Smile, dude.
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know we gotta find a way.